Howdy, with this first video, I want to go over a couple of functions in D2L, make sure you can find the response paper prompts and know what to do there. Those are going to start coming due next Wednesday. When you check your email, make sure you're outside of all your classes, especially if you're taking more than one class here at Northeast State. If you're in a particular class and you click your envelope, you're only going to see the emails from that one class, and you won't see like the emails from your instructors from other classes. So make sure you're on your D2L homepage. It's worth scrolling down to see what kind of messages they're sending you. Hopefully there's not too many more updates. For Northeast State, we're going online. We're going to have to see what Sullivan County does with our class. If we meet in class, then we'll meet in class. If we don't, we won't. But for right now, we're not participating in Sullivan County's extended spring break. We're getting back into the class, and we're going to be doing it online, right? Hopefully you got that message. I think Shelby or Jackie called everybody to remind you of that. But again, when you check an email, make sure you're not in a particular class or you won't see all your emails. Make sure you take a look at the schedule. We're not changing the schedule. I already got it open here. It's up there on the content page. The one thing we did revise was the grading sheet. Probably not going to be able to do a final exam in this class. And I'll pause while you shed a tear there. We're going to take those points and add them to the response papers, so those response papers become more important. But if you lost the class schedule, in fact, I'm going to put that up top there, or you don't have it, or you left it in your locker or whatever, there's a copy right there on the content page for the course. As you look at it, things are going to be pretty intense for the first couple of weeks. Some things will kind of ease off. But there's going to be quite a bit of reading. When we're not in class, that's an hour, that's 80 minutes we got to kind of make up online. So probably should be planning on spending about 2 hours a day in this class. And I know that's not, like, yay! But that's 80 minutes we're in class, and I'm doing math now. I'm doing this 40 minutes of additional work. So it's not that much if you think about it, because we're not actually in class. But right now you're going to get the introduction to literary movements here in a second. Then response number 2 comes due Thursday. I'll start on the homepage for the course. I'll put reminders up. I'll also remind you via email. If you see something that's kind of a long reading, kind of stop for a minute, go back and check your email, like this Abraham Williams sermon. I just want you to read the first 9 paragraphs, not the entire sermon. That's a long one. Might be an option for the first essay, but just for the response papers, I'm not looking for you to read these super long sermons and things like that. Same thing with Emerson and Thoreau. Reading excerpts from them, not the full readings. Kind of give you a taste of each one of these movements as we go along. But keep in mind, we're not going to change the schedule much. These responses will be various kinds of assignments. Since some of these are going to be, since they're all going to be online, we'll see if we can modify those, maybe shorten those up a little bit. But when I get back into MLA formatting, make sure you can quote from literature, things like that. We're going to do a works cited page again. But kind of keep up with the schedule. Again, you can kind of see the first couple of weeks, the reading's pretty intense. We're kind of building towards being able to discuss other things later on, and of course for the first essay. For the responses, they're going to be located over here on the responses link on the content page. The first one's going to be on the American Enlightenment. And what you're going to see generally is a short lecture. May not feel short when you're reading it, but it's just going over the American Enlightenment, what's going on. And what we're doing with this first essay is putting authors into historical context, kind of see what kind of ideas they're responding to, what's going on at the time. And you'll probably see it in the writing quite a bit. I also like to use art quite a bit to illustrate what's going on, or architecture, especially with something like the Enlightenment, that neoclassical style, that throwback to the Greeks and the Romans with the columns, the balanced proportion, all that good stuff. Something Enlightenment folks really were into. At the end of the lecture, you'll see a prompt for the response. We're going to be doing different types of stuff. To begin with, probably a couple of getting back into MLA formatting. Make sure you can quote, short quote, long quote. Put all this on a works cited page. But you're going to see the assignment there. You're going to see some prompts. You don't have to respond to all these prompts or every question within a prompt. If there's one thing you kind of latch onto and you can get your word count with that, that's good. But you showed me you've done the reading and thought about it and kind of can relate it to the movement we're talking about at the time. That's where the responses are. Some of these, we might get into a discussion board in this class. Y'all kind of know each other. But the first ones are going to be put into the Dropbox over here on assignments, which you've done before. Probably more than you ever wanted to in this class, right? But with as we talk about the short fiction, or some of it's going to be nonfiction, we're going to be talking about literary movements, and that's just the idea that the way people are thinking tends to change over time for various reasons. Right, the invention of the computer and the internet's radically changing how we think. It's remapping, literally remapping our brains. We're not sure how yet. We're kind of at the beginning of all this. But it's going to be very interesting, as particularly for your generation, as you go into the future, about how all this, these computers, this artificial intelligence, how all this is going to help or hinder our progress as human beings. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to take little chunks of time, kind of define what's going on during that time, and then kind of compare it to things that come after. So, like when you hear about the Middle Ages, you can kind of see it, the art, the attitudes towards human beings, the political structures at the time. People were viewed a certain way. There was only one church, and you belonged to it. We're talking about Western Europe, obviously, not the whole world, but the church dominated things politically, militarily, certainly religiously. If you were in the Middle Ages, about 500 to maybe 1300 AD, you experienced the world in a kind of a different way than we do now, obviously. See if I can get the slideshow to start. Yeah, current slide. Particularly in terms of religion, one, you were not taught to read, probably, unless you were in the religious or the ruling class. We don't need farm workers who can read. There's no point in doing that. Even if you could read, what would you read? All the books had to be hand copied, right? With the printing press hadn't been invented. Uh, it was written in Latin, so if you didn't know Latin, you couldn't read. So you couldn't. It's not like you could just go get your own Bible and open it up and read it and have what we now call this, or Christians call these days, this personal relationship with God. God's probably going to seem very big. You're going to sit in these huge cathedrals, kind of look at the stained glass windows. You know some of the stories, but if the services aren't Latin and the Bible's written in Latin and you can't read it anyway, uh, religion's got to be a much different experience than the way modern religions can experience it now, even in other religions other than the Christian one. But you can kind of see God's big, people are small. This chapel designed for kings. This one for the common people, or the little people, I guess. But even if you're a king, you get this feeling, God is big and awesome. I'm little and small. And what the church offers is this buffer between this awesome, powerful God and us, right? This little squirmy, sinful, nasty little peoples. And basically, the idea is you get through life to try and get through heaven by the end, right? But nobody's walking around with this "Jesus is my BFF" T-shirt or anything. Or if you did, the church would probably snag you, take you downstairs, put the thumb screws on you, and talk to you for a little bit, and maybe change your mind. But also, it's kind of feudal life. We'd live under the Duke of Blumpville, uh, and we kind of have hopefully a symbiotic relationship where he needed us and we needed him for protection. And but things were pretty static. When the Duke of Blumpville had a son, that eldest son was going to be the next Duke of Blumpville, right? There was no upper mobility. Uh, kind of not a horrible time to be alive. Plenty of good things going on, but if you're kind of a person of adventure and I'm an up and comer, it's like, well, where are you going to go? Would be kind of the question. Um, so life kind of maybe a little static in our terms. You can see it in the art a little bit. People aren't celebrated. You can see human forms aren't drawn or sculpted proportionally. You don't want to celebrate the human form because humans are just kind of these little nasty, vile creatures. The only reason to do this is to glorify God, right? Particularly with Western art. And you can kind of see this is more of a transition piece with Giotto. Moving into the Renaissance, all of a sudden we notice something happens, and a lot of things happen. And art's going to show that change. Literature's going to show that change. Religion's going to show that change. One, you can just see in the art, the age of humanism starting to develop. This is a humanities class, and this is where a lot of these ideas come from. The idea that we can celebrate the human being, our accomplishments, our bodies, our spirits, the individual particularly. Every individual suddenly becomes worthwhile, worth educating, worth pursuing that little spark of God within them. This is a radical new idea. The Middle Ages, now, they didn't think of you that way. But in the Renaissance, things are starting to change. It's not like an overnight change. It's not like sometime in 1358, everybody suddenly decided to be Renaissance people. The change was gradual. Sometimes it was violent. But you can just see in the art, this is Madonna and Child, as opposed to Jesus looking down upon us and being awesome and big. Jesus he's actually interacting with Mary, acknowledging her existence. Quite often in Middle Ages art, uh, Mary's just kind of a big chair for Jesus. But here we got this interaction. Jesus looks a little more human, a little more interested in what's going on with people. You can see that the arts are starting to represent people as they are. If human beings are God's greatest creation, we need to celebrate God's greatest creation. We're celebrating God by celebrating or portraying ourselves or examining ourselves. You're going to start seeing the human form as it is, without clothes on. Going back to Greek, Roman ideas, the Romans were a little closer to the Renaissance folks in Western Europe at the time. So not everything's going to be based on God, on glorifying God all of a sudden, except that we're doing it through our art and things like that by developing our talents, right? Sometimes you'll see with Middle Ages art, we don't even know who did it. They're not always signed. There wasn't really a need to. There's no copyright law, so if you wrote a book, people would just copy it. But keep in mind, they had to hand copy it. If you ever got your hand on a Bible, you'd probably never even touched one. But somebody had to hand copy that for you, right? And that cost you a lot of money. And people at our level probably didn't get to experience that, right? But things are changing in the Middle Ages. I mean, in the Renaissance. You kind of see 1480. This is about 30 years after the printing press has been developed. The printing press is going to have a radical, create radical changes. That's a new technology. Changes in shipbuilding are going to start changing the way we can explore the world. You can kind of see we're going to. It's nothing wrong with painting common people. Of course, it takes a little money to have your portrait painted, but it's going to start happening. We're getting the rise of the middle class a little bit, the merchant class, if you will. But you can see art is just changing radically. If you look in this mirror in the back, the artist is portraying himself painting the couple here. And notice the couple are painted as they are, right? They're not photo touched or anything like that. There's a, close up of that mirror in the background. And you can see there's the artist painting the picture in the back of the people. But just the detail and like the chandelier and things like that. Art's changing radically. And our view of the individual is changing radically. And what's going to start happening is religious reformers are going to start saying, hey, if we can print our own Bibles, another interesting development is people are writing in the vernacular. Dante's writing in Italian, Chaucer's writing in English. People are writing in their own language as opposed to Latin. So you don't have to know Latin to be part of the religious or academic community. You start getting your own books. You can start reading it in your own language because we're going to teach you to read because we want to do that to develop your talents and your little spark of God within you, right? Castiglione, a courtier at the time. You kind of see he's living a good life there, right? He's got all the furs. He's well dressed, well groomed. Going to start again celebrating what people can do. Here's Albrecht Dürer painting himself as kind of a Christ figure. If he'd done this 200-300 years earlier, they'd have probably burned him alive at the stake, right? That'd just been blasphemy. But art is changing. We're celebrating the artist because the artist is one of these people that can develop their talents and celebrate our humanity. Again, you're going to see the human form studied, portrayed as it is. This is Cellini's Perseus, uh, holding up the head of Medusa. Look what people can do. We can do remarkable things. But if you just kind of see side by side what's going on, something radical has changed in how we view art and what art should do. And that's kind of what we're going to get into with these movements. We're going to kind of start in the middle of the story with Bradford and the Puritans. And I'm not going to talk about them too much because there's not a lot of Puritan fiction out there. We're going to move to the Enlightenment. And then you got to notice with the Enlightenment, more fiction, maybe not on the American side as much, but then we're going to get into the Romantics and things like that. So, but kind of notice that things change. A lot of your ideas about religion, things like that, have been formed by previous movements, particularly the Renaissance, the Reformation, Martin Luther, and particularly the Protestant reformers, kind of saying like, no, excuse me, we don't need the church to act as a buffer between us and God. We have the Bible. We now have the printing press. We can print them fairly cheaply. Everybody can get their hands on one. And definitely going to see with the Puritans, and if you have the access to one, you should read it. When you kind of think about the Puritans, you might think about these witch-hanging crazy people, but they were children of the Renaissance. They were well read. They knew about history. When you read Bradford and he's quoting from the Bible, he's probably not having to look those passages up. Very intense people. If you have this access and this ability to know God through the Bible, then oh my gosh, that's the only thing you should be doing. And you should be writing these journals to document what you're doing and see how it fits into God's sense of history. So they're history fanatics, they're reading fanatics, they're just very interesting people. And we still see their influence in our culture today, particularly that Calvinistic kind of influence. And you're going to see the Enlightenment folks responding to some of these Puritan ideas, and then you're going to see the Romantics responding to the Enlightenment folks, and on until we get to our modern times. So hopefully you find it kind of interesting. But again, we're going to take it in little chunks. Where'd the schedule get off to? I'm going to start with the Enlightenment, get to the Romantics, the Realists. You might have had a little of this last year, or maybe a lot of this last year in American literature as high school juniors. But we're going to kind of get back into it a little bit, see what you all have to say about it. If you have questions, be sure to let me know. That's the real key to an internet course. Make sure you ask questions when you have them. If you're just staring at the screen, going like, "What's he want?" Send me a message, and it might be a link you just missed, or maybe a link I forgot to put up. Um, so hopefully this isn't a horrible transition, but we do have a little bit of work. It's going to be pretty quick at the beginning of with the first responses and all the short fiction. But we'll get through it. Again, let me know if you have any questions. We'll talk to you later. Bye bye.